Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to everybody today. Thank you for being present at the best panel so far in today's conference, the Untapped Potential of Community Energy. So we're gonna take a bit more of like a policy focus for this panel and get it right down at ground level. Local governments and their communities play an outsized role in reducing energy consumption, combating climate change, and helping ensure a just energy transition, because they own about 60% of public infrastructure in Canada, are responsible for over half of energy use and GHG emissions. And because many of the solutions to achieving net zero, as we heard from other panelists today, are distributed, and that means they're also unique to local context. Because of these things, we're going to need strong leadership and aggressive action in every community across Canada, whether they're large, small, urban, rural, or remote. Globally, the demand for heat is the largest energy use, accounting for almost half of total energy demand in 2021, and that's significantly more than transportation, clocking in at about 30% and plug load at 20%. And that is why our GHG emissions are so hard to tackle. If we're going to achieve net zero while respecting the unique context of each of the communities in Canada, and that a lot of the solutions for heating are local, we really can't take any solutions off the table. Luckily, local governments and their community partners, such as developers, builders, tech and service providers, their utility partners, are stepping up and offering some innovative solutions. Today's panel is going to speak to some of these innovations, as well as the challenges that local governments face when trying to create and implement solutions. So, Jeff, we'll start with you.
I'm Jeff Cowan. I lead Hamilton Community Enterprises, HCE for short. Otherwise, it made for a very long email address. But HCE, we're a community-based, local, integrated utility solutions provider. We compete in the non-regulated energy and telecommunication sectors, with the City of Hamilton being our sole shareholder. To that point, on the energy side, we operate district heating, district cooling, renewables such as geo exchange, solar thermal, solar PV, as well as some demand response systems. And then if that wasn't enough, in 2015, we incorporated a telecommunication provider, a local internet service provider. And it goes along with my background, which has fundamentally been working with municipalities to find untapped opportunities for them to leverage these unique positions that they have to create these non-regulated and competitive affiliate subsidiaries to drive local innovation and to try and bring maximum benefit within their communities.
Huga Energy is a platform which enables trading of renewable energy within the community, and anything associated with it is carbon credits, and that also can be traded on our platform. Now, we already have a platform where we are trading renewable energy. We are operational in 3 countries with revenue opportunities, in India, in California, in US, and in Canada. And now we are looking at expanding ourselves in UK. We are in midst of developing carbon credit market on our platform in partnership with the University of Toronto. My main customers are municipal-owned utilities, where we are trying to help municipalities to meet their net zero goals. At the same time, we are helping utilities not to cannibalize their revenue because of the renewable generation, but maximize it. And at the same time, there is a cost of achieving net zero, and that's what we'll discuss during our discussion, and how to minimize that cost and maximize the return which will be coming out of net zero.
Local governments now are planning and implementing, or want to implement, often complex solutions that involve multiple partners and with different layers of ownership and governments. The capacity here I'm referring to is like the knowledge, tools, resources, financing, and the governance structures under which they operate. They often don't exist locally. They don't have that capacity built yet. to address the challenges that they might face when trying to implement these solutions. So I'm curious about the largest barrier each of you encounter when speaking with communities that want to do more to reduce their energy use and emissions, and what have you seen as solutions to overcome these challenges?
When you're getting down to the street level, is that it's tough to speak in platitudes and generalities. Okay. Municipalities have real matters that they need to address. And what it means is that you start dealing with the concepts of micro-segmentation. Every jurisdiction is different from each other. A little bit of that is through history, a little bit of that is through localness and pride as well. And so it's tough just to point to one and say, well, everybody should be doing this, where you actually may find the opportunities or the factors of success are very local to that community. As an example, in representing Hamilton, and as a provider of heat networks, is our widely deployed industrial base. As an example, the TAF had done a recent study in general around the GTA buildings are the largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, followed by transportation. Our community has a very unique opportunity to harness the waste or the residual heat that comes from what we refer to as the industrial bayfront, the part of Hamilton that you see as you're driving down into Niagara. And there's a massive untapped opportunity to decarbonize building heating through being able to harness that residual heat. Now that's something that makes sense for Hamilton, and it makes sense for that community and the economy, and helping promote job creation and success within its industrial base, some of the principles within the circular economy. But that may not have the same applicability in a jurisdiction like Markham, let's say. And so, again, I think it's a matter of getting away from some of these and just looking at the generalities, but really start to tune the conversation down to things that are significant within the jurisdictions.
150 countries, over 1,000 cities have signed net zero goal. It's nice to hear, but there is very little or not detailed understanding of what it means to achieve net zero goal. So I think that's the big education piece, which is a big challenge. So that's point number one. Point number two, there are various studies, in research domain, which claim that it is roughly about $2.5 trillion spent every year, which is roughly about 7 billion every day to achieve that net zero goal. So it's humongous. From where that money is going to come, how it is going to come, there is uncertainty. So that's the second challenge which we are facing in the market. The third is, what are the different factors of achieving net zero? So, net zero is only energy, or net zero is energy plus. So what we did, we worked with some of the municipalities, and what we realized is energy, like for example, if we make 100% of the community on renewable generation, then it is just the 30% of the net zero goal. What are the remaining aspects of net zero? I think that's what we will discuss during this panel discussion, because heating is one of the aspects which is the key component of achieving net zero.
So as I alluded to in the opening remarks, heating, otherwise known as thermal energy, is often the elephant in the room. We haven't discussed it much here today when discussing decarbonizing our economy. So how do we make thermal sexy, or at least not as controversial to talk about? And how do we create policy solutions that enable low carbon thermal solutions? And this is, so many questions within a question, but what's at stake for communities if we don't talk about thermal?
I'll take a stab at that. An engineer by trade, but I think you got to start by taking a lot of the engineers out of the conversation really early on, and try and tie it into how the end user or the consumer is deriving value from that strategy. The essence of our business and our belief is, because fundamentally we existed to compete in the non-regulated energy market, and the DNA of our organization was in building thermal networks. And it's interesting in Ontario because it's a non-regulated market. And so in that regards, we can build infrastructure that crosses municipal boundaries. We are another source to be able to move joules of energy in and around a community. And we take this fundamental principle of don't let any joule go to waste. we need to optimize the electric system to deal with the challenges it's going to face. The electrification of transport, the electrification of everything, okay? Everything in the future, in some way, shape, or form, is a tree, a fire hydrant, probably a sewer grate, is going to have some form of digitization at some stage of the game in the future. And mass digitization leads to mass electrification. So we look at it and say, well, if buildings then become a major emitter of GHG, then this thought of decarbonizing building heating just through electrification starts to put a huge stress on an aged utility. It is very, very difficult to build infrastructure in today's day and age. There is more regulation, there is more policy. It is more difficult now to trade. You go to the community and say, oh, I need to bore across this street 30 meters, and then you watch all the policies. And so it's very difficult to modernize the grid as fast as it needs to be modernized. And so this is where in other mature jurisdictions globally, you see very sophisticated complementary networks that are the most effective of moving every joule of energy. And to that point, we target building heating as a very strategic load to take off of the electrical grid, and then to move that on to heat-specific networks. And so that could be a network because district makes sense because there's economies of scale and there's justifications why that could be the best approach. There are other low-carbon energy solutions that could be on-premise that are also geared towards making the best use of high efficiency electrification by using other complementary technologies. And so, you know, it's our fundamental principle to make the best use of every joule of energy that we have available to us and put it on the most appropriate network to deliver it.
If we can help communities to go off-grid, that is microgrid, and which is a renewable energy-based solution, and it's 100%, then you focus on making your grid cleaner. And then you have got extra power now to use it for heating services, for intensive heat process type of applications. So that's the approach we are taking, is try to expedite or catalyze converting the communities into renewable energy and let the greener, cleaner grid take care of extensive heat process type of a system. So that's the technology solution.
Given the complexity of the energy transition and what we've been speaking about, how can different players in the space really help communities understand their role?
Where we have evolved to in trying to establish long duration stability in seeing an execution of a plan. Because it's difficult if you're dealing with, on the political side, election terms and election cycles. It's difficult when you're dealing with the management level where they're dealing with budgets. There's a lot of challenges in municipalities, from social requirements to rebuilding of infrastructure through funding, and they're dealing in annual budget cycles. And then so how do you encourage a city staff member making a decision that might not benefit the immediate 12-month budget cycle, but could have a longer compounding benefit down the path? And then it's interesting when you deal with the community and businesses and constituents. There's a brokenness in the value cycle when you talk about long-term duration. And I'll take one example about multi-unit residential type development. And there's a few different models, but let me just talk about one model where you have a developer, and then ultimately the development then gets incorporated and then handed over to a condo corporation. The problem is that some of the technologies that would lead into sustainability, that would lead to resiliency, aren't necessarily in the vested interest upfront with the developer. The developer is looking to maximize the return on the development. They want to try and minimize risk. They want to try and prefer things that they have familiarity with, and then maximize their return. And that causes a different set of decisions to be made that might be at odds to where you would see the benefit of the long-term consumer or the occupant of that condo. That could be towards sustainability. It could be towards minimize the impact of increasing energy prices and things along those lines. And so there's a break in the value equation there. On the data side, on the telecom side, I always use this trilemma called cheap, fast, good. You can only circle two, okay? And because if you try and circle all three, you're going down an approach of something that in the long term won't be sustainable. And then I think on the energy side, when you want to talk about in terms of value, it's cost, low cost, it's environmental sustainability, and it's resiliency. Okay, it's very difficult if any one entity is trying to circle all three, right? And that's where the community needs to kind of come together, each one with their areas of expertise.
Net zero goals, policies, all these things are very good on paper. But when it comes to actual implementation of the project, it all boils down to what is there for them. So what is there for the municipality, what is there for the utilities, what is there for the community, and what is there for the homeowner, for example. So, you know, as a supplier of a net zero solution, we have to take care expectations of all the stakeholders. And so communities, their challenges, they have signed net zero, or their governments have signed net zero targets, but they don't have tools, mechanisms, fundings to achieve that. So we have to ensure that, you know, there is something for them. Coming to the utilities, I don't know how many of you know, but nowhere in the world the local solar or renewable energy penetration, sorry, I said solar, but I meant renewable, which is including solar, wind, geothermal, the penetration is not more than 10%. Is it not surprising? If it is such a good technology, such a good for the environment, such an impact on all of us, then why it is just 10%? Why it is not 50%? Why it is not 40%? The challenge is it cannibalizes the revenue of the utilities. So utilities, like I have been an audience to a utility in Arizona which went to the court and got a stay order for solar. Ridiculous, sounds ridiculous, but then they had a business logic to it. So we have to bring utilities as a partner. We cannot, I heard some of the previous panel members talking about moving away from the utility. No, utilities have to be a partner in this change. So that's the, you know, the second stakeholder which should be brought in collaboration. The third is what is there for the community. So what we are creating is make your community 100% renewable. So basically you can have 50% of homes with solar and then share and trade. The way we are bringing utility is letting utilities to own the large community scale batteries so that they absorb anything excess which is coming out of the community and then redistributing it within the community. So now they have got a play in this whole solution. The last thing is for the community, this whole renewable solution creates carbon credits. So we did a rough back of the envelope calculation for a community in California. This is a 0.5 meg solar plant, and it is selling all the solar generation to city, which is using it for EV charging. Now, EV charging generates 10x of carbon credit in California. So it would be creating about $140,000 worth of carbon credit US dollars for the city. So imagine if there are tens and thousands of such communities within the municipalities and towns, they would be generating revenue which will be offsetting the cost of achieving net zero.
If you could suggest just one thing, maybe in 30 seconds each of you, how can local governments and communities be best empowered to overcome all the barriers that we talked about today to energy transition, actually achieve net zero?
I think it's education. It's awareness. We have to take the technology out of it. At the street level, if you're talking about DERs and you're talking about storage and you're like, that's not what they're thinking, right? They're thinking about costs. They're thinking about, you know, how they're putting food on the table tomorrow, right? And so you have to articulate this in a way that the person on the street understands what the importance is, right? And I think sustainability is a fantastic objective and target, and it helps move the conversation forward. But even in then, how do you bring it down into terms that people can relate to, and then they start to demand and have expectations that then drive it upwards? We take a market-based approach. We have people carrying briefcases, walking down the streets, trying to sell, you know, our thermal services. They want outcomes. And so what we're focusing ourselves on now is this concept of being an as-a-service provider, where we're outcome focused. We try and make it turnkey and take a lot of the complexity, and what, you can see that they're being confronted with out of the equation.
Join me in giving a hand together for our great panelists today. Thank you all.